Hi guys, welcome to another 3 scary hostel horror stories. As a solo traveler, I have stayed in numerous hostels as a way to save money and meet interesting people. Throughout my life, I have experienced about 20 hostels, and around 90% of the time, I had positive experiences. However, my first truly dreadful encounter occurred at a place called Freedom Traveler Hostel. Before I share the details, it's important to note that the hostel itself was not entirely to blame for my terrible experience. Freedom Traveler Hostel is situated in Rome, and it was my first visit to the city. Being unfamiliar with the landscape, I heavily relied on Google Maps and locals to find the place. Strangely, there were no signs outside, making it challenging to locate. Nonetheless, I managed to enter through large brown doors and was greeted warmly by a kind woman at the front counter. Having booked a 4-person room, I was shown to my accommodation, which had 1 bunk bed and 2 single beds, providing space for 4 people. The room had a green theme but wasn't very spacious. The hostel didn't have many guests at that time, which I didn't mind as I thought it would grant me more privacy. The staff member, who was continuously smiling, assisted me with luggage storage, but I wasn't entirely confident in the arrangements. Deciding to leave my luggage in the room, I laid down for a quick power nap after a tiring day of traveling. While napping, I was interrupted by a knock on the door, and 2 young Italian men entered the room. Despite being mid-nap, I engaged in friendly conversation with them. They introduced themselves as Marco and Lucio, seemingly brothers. Marco was quite tall, standing around 6 foot, while Lucio, around 5'11", shared a resemblance with him. Both had tanned skin and receding hairlines, though they appeared to be in their early 20s. Though not very friendly looking, they seemed alright at first. However, as they conversed in Italian, they seemed unaware that I understood the language. To my dismay, they began talking about me and laughing, referring to me as a silly white boy. Despite wanting to confront them in Italian, I decided to keep up the pretense of not understanding. Soon, they left the room, and I assumed they had left their luggage in the garden shed. I mingled with other friendly tourists in the garden before setting off to explore the city. Upon returning to the hostel, I expected people to be socializing in the lounge or garden, but no one was around. Feeling tired at 9 p.m., I went to sleep in the dark room. At some point, I woke up to whispered voices. The brothers had returned. Remaining still, I listened to their conversation, which was still in Italian. I couldn't make out their exact words, but it seemed they were discussing my luggage. Suddenly, I felt a cold, wet cloth with a sweet smell pressed against my face. Reacting instinctively, I yelled and swatted it away. The man standing over me attempted to subdue me, but I fought back and screamed for help. Startled, the other brother pulled him away, and both men fled from the room. I quickly grabbed my bag and shoes and sought assistance from the front desk. The person on duty confirmed that he saw the men leave but had no record of them staying at the hostel. They turned out to be local criminals attempting to rob visitors by using chloroform. I decided not to stay there any longer, and I'm sure they've since improved their security. At the time, anyone could have easily entered the hostel, and if I hadn't been awake, I could have been chloroformed and robbed. After this harrowing experience, I became more cautious in choosing the hostels I stayed at during my travels. Hello guys, welcome to the second scary story, so make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting scary stories. Sitting on the bed in my hostel room, I was overwhelmed with anxiety as I had just started at one of the largest universities in the state. Being fortunate enough to secure a place there, my family was extremely proud of me. Unlike most of my family members who were high school dropouts, I had the privilege of pursuing higher education. My aunt, the only person I knew who graduated from university, left our neighborhood immediately after our graduation ceremony and never returned to visit. As I unpacked my few belongings, I observed my roommate's neat and orderly side of the room. I had assumed she would be a typical nerdy girl, but appearances can be deceiving. Later that day, I was introduced to a group of girls in the dorm, and they all seemed to have a bond that intrigued me. A couple of weeks later, my roommate Charlene woke me up in the middle of the night. She invited me to join their group of sisters and explained that I needed to pass a special initiation night. Curiosity got the better of me, and despite not knowing what to expect, I accepted the invitation. In the basement that night, surrounded by darkness, I was initiated into their sisterhood through a painful and disturbing ritual. I endured physical abuse and discomfort, feeling betrayed by my decision to join. Struggling to breathe due to my asthma, I finally realized the danger I had put myself in. Eventually, some of the girls noticed my distress and took me outside, where I was found by a kind woman who took care of me and contacted my parents. After this horrifying experience, I decided not to return to the university and enrolled in a nearby college instead, determined to move on from that dark chapter of my life. Let's move to the third story. When I turned 18, I took a job working at the front desk of my college's residence building. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, with 2.5 floors reserved for hotel rooms and half of the third floor used for student housing. The building had an outdated swipe key system powered by 4 AA batteries for each door. One night, while working an overnight shift around 1 or 2 a.m., a dark-haired guy approached the front desk from inside the building. He claimed to have left his key card in his room, so I made him a new one without checking our system properly. This was my first mistake, as I should have charged him for a new key, as per the policy for students. Later that night, around 3 or 4 a.m., he returned, saying he couldn't get into his room and that the door wasn't working. Suspecting the batteries had died, I went with him to his room to replace them. He asked me to prop the door open while I worked, but I decided to leave it closed for safety reasons. During the repair, he repeatedly tried to entice me to go further into the room, insisting that things needed fixing. I declined and noticed that the room seemed completely empty, which raised suspicions. However, I attributed it to him being a new international student without much stuff. He then asked me to remove my glasses, and when I refused, he attempted to take them off himself. I swatted his hand away and continued to focus on the door. After finishing the repairs, I left as quickly as possible. He followed me back to the front desk, asking me to return to his room as the door still wasn't working. I realized something was seriously wrong but pretended to comply until I could make my escape. Once he went back inside the room, I hurried down the stairwell to the front desk and called campus security. He came down a few minutes later, trying to convince them that he lived there. Security questioned him, but his responses were evasive and full of lies. He was eventually forced to leave the premises. It later turned out that he had discovered an empty room, which was being used as a housekeeper's break room. He had taken advantage of the situation to gain access to the building and cause trouble. Despite not doing anything illegal, the encounter left me deeply unsettled, and I left the job soon after. To this day, I remain haunted by the memory of that disturbing incident.